if the president decides that his rival is a corrupt person and he orders the military or orders someone to assassinate him, is that within his official acts for which he can get immunity?
It would depend on the hypothetical, but we can see that could well be an official act.
Maybe I'll say something good. Okay.
We are following some breaking news from the Trump campaign. Chairman Paul Manafort has resigned.
Here's what I think happened to the United States in the past 8 years.
Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort today pleading not guilty after that 12-count indictment.
He ended up polarizing the country in a way that brings us close to fascism.
Trump granting a full pardon to self-proclaimed dirty trickster Roger Stone, one of his most loyal allies.
I'm very happy with what I did.
Also receiving a pardon tonight, the president's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort.
And in accompanying that, trains Republicans to just hate rule of law.
So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I want to thank you all. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you all for being in.
You'd have to spin up the ball of thread before you can tell the story.
The internet is not just a medium. It is, as the Obama campaign profoundly showed us, a path to power and hopefully change. The Hillman Foundation has been ahead of this curve. This year's recipient is Marcy Wheeler, who is at the center of that path to power.
Let's bring in independent journalist Marcy Wheeler. She's a former senior fellow at George Washington University Center for Cyber and Homeland Security.
We're joined by independent journalist Marcy Wheeler. She edits EmptyWheel.net, has been closely following the multiple investigations of President Trump.
We are talking today in the wake of the Supreme Court hearing on Trump's claim to have absolute immunity. And things look bleak for the home team. The men, so the Republican-appointed men in general, were very clear that they were going to find a way not only to delay this case, but at least three of them, being Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, made it clear that they are entertaining ways to throw out the entire January 6th case altogether. For example, Brett Kavanaugh, who, as a young lawyer working for Ken Starr, investigated a sitting president for allegations that he lied, while president, about a consensual blowjob, an abusive but nevertheless consensual blowjob, argued yesterday that presidents can only be prosecuted for laws, for the 3 or 4 or 5 laws that statute explicitly says apply to presidents, meaning it's effectively granting Trump the immunity that he wants.
Follow up on the OLC opinions question. As you read them, and I think I read them, they articulate a clear statement rule as to this court's cases for covering official acts. And your point, I think, but I just want to underscore this, is that none of the statutes alleged here or cited here have a clear statement covering the president, therefore meaning that the president can't be charged for any official acts under these statutes.
That's absolutely correct.
Gorsuch laid out a vision of January 6th in which it's just a protest and in which Donald Trump did nothing wrong.
Okay, so why couldn't he be prosecuted for leading a civil rights protest in front of the Capitol that delays a vote on a piece of important legislation?
These men are trying very hard to rewrite statute and rewrite the Constitution so that Donald Trump will not be held accountable, at least for January 6th.
In December, the judge who's handling that case, Judge Tanya Chutkan here in Washington, said, no, there is no presidential immunity. There's one president at a time, and being a former president doesn't give you a get-out-of-jail-free card. They went to the appeals court here in Washington. They resoundingly rejected this claim of presidential immunity, saying if it existed, it would collapse our system of separated powers. The special counsel tried to get this to the Supreme Court earlier, knowing it was headed there anyhow. He was rejected. The Supreme Court took this on its own time frame, the last day of their arguments. It has put the tenability of a trial before the election at grave risk.
And no matter what happens today, the former president has managed to delay that trial. The arguments are starting, so let's listen in.
All right. Now, if an incumbent who loses a very close, hotly contested election knows that a real possibility after leaving office is not that the president is going to be able to go off into a peaceful retirement, but that the president may be criminally prosecuted by a bitter political opponent, will that not lead us into a cycle that destabilizes the functioning of our country as a democracy? And we can look around the world and find countries where we have seen this process, where the loser gets thrown in jail.
So I think it's exactly the opposite, Justice Alito.
And I think that this fits into what we've been talking about, because those three men, at least, believe or claim to believe the bullshit that Trump has been telling. So this whole arc, starting from Donald Trump asks for Russian help.
I will tell you this. Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
And he's got aides everywhere with clear ties and suspect ties to Russia.
Lawyers for Paul Manafort accidentally revealed in a court filing today that the special counsel has evidence Manafort shared polling data with an associate linked to Russian intelligence during the 2016 campaign.
And as a result, he gets investigated for it, and he flips that.
Welcome, everyone, to the last gasp of the Russia collusion conspiracy theory.
He turns that. Most Republicans today believe that the Russian investigation was abusive, rather than that the Russian investigation established that 5 of his top aides lied to cover up the ties he had to Russia, and we still don't know what the full extent of those lies are. So he flipped it, and since that time, he has been training Republicans to believe this bullshit about him being unfairly prosecuted, right? These men repeatedly said, I don't want to deal with the facts in front of me. I don't want to deal with the reality of what Trump did. I don't want to deal with the fact that Trump tried to prevent the lawfully elected president from being elected.
Engaging in conspiracies to defraud the United States with respect to one of the most important functions, namely the certification of the next president.
Well, I don't want to dispute that particular application of 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States, to the particular facts here. But would you not agree that that is a peculiarly open-ended statutory prohibition?
And I would add Chief Justice Roberts in that there was one point where Michael Dreeben, arguing for Jack Smith, starts laying out how if Trump gets away with this, what Trump was trying to do was throw out 81 million votes. And as Dreeben is describing that we're talking about 81 million votes, John Roberts, who of course started chipping away at the Voting Rights Act, has been really the architect of reversing protections for the right to vote in this country, cuts off Michael Dreeben. He doesn't want to hear about the 81 million votes.
And the president doesn't have an official role in that proceeding. So it's difficult for me to understand how there could be a serious constitutional question about saying you can't use fraud to defeat that function. You can't obstruct it through deception. You can't deprive millions of voters of their right to have their vote counted for the candidate who they chose.
Thank you, counsel. Justice Thomas? Justice Alito?
This is about Trump, the victim, not the 81 million Americans who voted for Joe Biden, whose votes Donald Trump was trying to throw out. But you have Gorsuch saying, let's pretend that this was a peaceful protest and it delayed Congress trying to pass legislation for a little while. Does 18 U.S.C. 1512C2, the obstruction statute that Trump is charged under twice on the January 6th case, does that apply to this case?
And again, I'm not concerned about this case, but I am concerned about future uses of the criminal law to target political opponents based on accusations about their motives, whether it's re-election or who knows what corrupt means in 1512. right? We don't know what that means. Maybe we'll find out sometime soon. But the dangerousness of accusing your political opponent of having bad motives, and if that's enough to overcome your core powers or any other limits, reactions, thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that you're raising a very difficult question.
That's the idea, right? I mean,
that is the idea.
Testing the limits of both sides' arguments.
And I'm going to say something that I don't normally say, which is that's really not involved in this case. We don't have bad political motive in that sense.
I understand that. I appreciate that, but you also appreciate that we're writing a rule for the ages.
Yes.
And what Gorsuch was doing was reinventing the facts, was adopting the story that Donald Trump and people like Marjorie Taylor Greene want to adopt, which is that it was just a peaceful protest. There were no weapons. There weren't 140 cops who were assaulted. There weren't threats of assassination against both Republicans and Democrats. They want to disappear all of that. One of the most startling things about this hearing was that, I think it was Alito said, we've got protections for that moment when a president asks SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his rival. And it's that those SEAL Team 6 members know that they can't follow an unlawful order.
I don't want to slander SEAL Team 6 because they're honorable. They're honorable officers, and they are bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice not to obey unlawful orders. But
now, if the president has immunity, then it's not an unlawful order to begin with. But the other thing is, we have an example of that in January 6th, right? Mike Pence was given an unlawful order. Mike Pence was repeatedly pressured to throw out the votes of Joe Biden.
That morning, meaning January 5th, the president issued a tweet expressly stating that the vice president had the power to reject electors.
I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, I have to tell you. I hope that our great vice president comes through for us. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
Right? And the idea is that it worked in 2021 that Mike Pence refused an unlawful order. But then what happened to Mike Pence? Donald Trump got on Twitter and tried to get the man killed. Donald Trump got on Twitter in the middle of a riot where people were running down the hallway saying, "Hang Mike Pence." And riled them up further. And this is what Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh are embracing. The fact that Donald Trump can do that and there's no recourse. Mike Pence's attempted assassination doesn't matter because Mike Pence, nevertheless, did the right thing. Brett Kavanaugh, as I said, Brett Kavanaugh wants to throw out all the laws, except if it's Bill Clinton getting a consensual blowjob. Brett Kavanaugh wants to throw out all the laws for presidents unless they specifically name the president. And in so doing, one of his pieces of logic is that conspiracy to defraud the United States, which is what primarily is focused on the fake elector certificates. He is arguing that because presidents do stuff that's similar to that all the time, we can't in this case apply it to Donald Trump.
Well, it's a serious constitutional question whether a statute can be applied to the president's official acts. So wouldn't you always interpret the statute not to apply to the president, even under your formulation, unless Congress had spoken with some clarity?
I don't think across the board that a serious constitutional question exists on applying any criminal statute to the president.
The problem is the vague obstruction and 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States, can be used against a lot of presidential activities historically with a creative prosecutor who wants to go after a president.
Well, let me try to backtrack a little bit.
That's what we're talking about historically, is the risk and going forward.
In other words, we have to let Donald Trump off the hook, because if Donald Trump can be prosecuted, then there will be edge cases where presidents might be prosecuted. Brett Kavanaugh says, in the hands of a creative prosecutor, you might charge a president with conspiracy to defraud the United States. And again, we're talking about fake elector certificates.
Arizona was one of the 7 states where alternate electors signed paperwork falsely claiming Trump had won the states. Prosecutors have already charged alternate electors, this is in quotes, in Nevada, Georgia, and Michigan. Now, here's the thing about this story. Lest you think that this attempt after January 6th was some fly-by-night crackpot, or leading up to January 6th was some fly-by-night crackpot scheme, the Arizona indictment yet again proves how coordinated these plots allegedly went all the way up to Donald Trump. And again, from NBC News, quote, Trump is described as unindicted conspirator 1 in Arizona indictment, which includes charges of conspiracy, fraud, and forgery, end quote.
We're talking about documents that had no validity that Trump solicited in the course of being a candidate, which everyone there, including Trump's lawyer, agreed using the blasting game, using the civil standard that the D.C. Circuit adopted. Everyone agreed that stuff Trump does as a candidate is not an official act and therefore he can be prosecuted for it. But Brett Kavanaugh wants to excuse him for this so that future presidents won't get charged for conspiracy to defraud the United States. But the important thing is he's suggesting it takes a creative prosecutor to get there.
The problem is the vague stat, obstruction and 371 conspiracy to defraud the United States can be used against a lot of presidential activities historically with a creative prosecutor who wants to go after a president.
One of the things Kavanaugh did, which was insane, which really hasn't gotten enough attention, is he said, I've always had a problem with Morrison v. Olson. Morrison v. Olson was precedent that upheld the constitutionality of the independent counsel statute that Ken Starr was working on when he investigated Bill Clinton for lying about a consensual blowjob. And Kavanaugh has never hidden the fact that he hates this holding.
Hi, I'm U.S. Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. I just want to take a moment and explain one of the decisions of the United States Supreme Court that I'm going to be using to question Judge Kavanaugh next week in the confirmation hearings as he is considered for the Supreme Court. One of my concerns is that as I've looked at what Judge Kavanaugh has written and said as a judge and before he went on the D.C. Circuit, is that he's got a very big view of the power of the president. One of the decisions that's most important in raising this question is Morrison v. Olson. It's a 1988 decision, a 7-1 overwhelming majority decision of the Supreme Court that upheld the constitutionality of the independent counsel statute. And that 7-1 decision had one dissent, a dissent written by then Justice Scalia. A dissent in which, for a variety of reasons, he said the independent counsel statute was bad law, was unconstitutional, and shouldn't have been upheld by the majority. But why does this matter today? Because Judge Kavanaugh has cited that dissent many times.
And before he was confirmed, he said, I have a problem with it. So he frames his intervention the other day as being about Morrison v. Olson. This is the counterpart. This is the notion that presidents, and one time he actually said president rather than former president, the presidents are always going to be investigated.
Like Justice Gorsuch, I'm not focused on the here and now of this case. I'm very concerned about the future. And I think one of the court's biggest mistakes was Morrison versus Olson. I think that was a terrible decision for the presidency and for the country, and not because there were bad people who were independent counsels, but President Reagan's administration, President Bush's administration, President Clinton's administration were really hampered in their view, all three, by the independent counsel structure. That's the concern going forward, is that the system will, when former presidents are subject to prosecution, and the history of Morrison versus Olson tells us it's not going to stop. It's going to cycle back and be used against the current president or the next president and the next president and the next president after that.
Now, he didn't mention Robert Hur, right? Robert Hur investigated Joe Biden as a sitting president.
Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed you to serve as special counsel for the United States Department of Justice to conduct a full and thorough investigation of certain matters to determine whether or not Joseph Biden should be charged with unlawfully removing and retaining classified documents. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And nowhere in that order does Attorney General Garland authorize you to conduct an investigation and issue a report on whether President Biden is mentally fit to serve as president. Isn't that correct?
That does not appear in the appointment order.
Once the DOJ opened the investigation, President Biden and his personal counsel fully cooperated. Isn't that correct?
We did identify some evidence of willful retention and disclosure, but we also
the point
noted
is, though, that the president cooperated fully with you. And didn't they never tried to hide any documents from you, did they?
The report does note steps of cooperation taken by the president.
Thank you, sir.
For basically giving back classified documents and not being sure about how they got there in the first place.
You want to be perceived, understandably, as credible. And so I want to first see if you will pledge to not accept an appointment from Donald Trump if he is elected again as president.
Congressman, I'm not here to testify
Seems like an easy
about
answer.
what will happen in the
Considering
future.
what I just laid out.
I'm here to talk about the report and the work that went into it.
So you have this politicized prosecutor investigating Joe Biden. Brett Kavanaugh doesn't mention that. He doesn't mention Hunter Biden, which we can come back to. Instead, he's only interested in Jack Smith. But what he suggests is that the entire investigation, the entire January 6th investigation was Jack Smith's investigation. And of course, that defies reality. Because we know that the investigation into Jeffrey Clark started in January of 2021.
This morning, a former Department of Justice official is lashing out at the FBI after agents raided his home. Jeffrey Clark says he answered the door in his pajamas.
We know the investigation into Sidney Powell started no later than September of 2021.
Federal prosecutors have demanded the financial records of multiple fundraising organizations launched by attorney Sidney Powell after the 2020 election as part of a criminal investigation.
We know that after they seized Rudy Giuliani's phones for another purpose.
Rudy Giuliani is a great patriot. He does these things. He just loves this country. And they raid his apartment. It's like so unfair and such a it's like a double standard.
They accessed them in such a way they could use them for January 6th. By January of 2022, we know they sent out warrants against John Eastman and Jeffrey Clark in May of 2022.
Pete, what do we know?
The Justice Department seized his phone. So it's fair to conclude that they did not seize it just to admire it. They wanted to look at what's in it. And to do that, they had to get a search warrant. And today they obtained one. So right now, Mr. Eastman is trying to get them to stop.
We know that the privilege battles between Trump and DOJ started in June of 2022. Oh, and we also know that Lisa Monaco overtly said that they were investigating the fake elector plot in January of 2022.
Well, first on the issue you raised in terms of fraudulent elector certifications has been reported. We've received those referrals. Our prosecutors are looking at those, and I can't say anything more on ongoing investigations. But more broadly, look, the Attorney General has been very, very clear. We are going to follow the facts and the law wherever they lead.
So all of those things precede the appointment of a special counsel. This is not like the January 6th case and, frankly, the stolen documents case. Neither of those is an example where a special counsel was appointed to investigate somebody. A special counsel who is nonpartisan, was a career appointee of DOJ for a long time, prosecuted both left and right, and sometimes failed as part of a public integrity team. It's not a Morrison v. Olson problem. Kavanaugh just made that up. And he made that up to suggest that there's going to be this quid pro quo that presidents are going to continue to investigate their predecessor. And again, hiding the Joe Biden investigation, and more importantly, hiding the Hunter Biden investigation, which we know adopted a special counsel because Republicans were demanding that David Weiss revisit this Alexander Smirnoff tip.
A former FBI informant has been charged for lying about President Biden and Biden's son Hunter and their involvement in business dealings with the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. Now, the reason why this is significant is that this individual and his testimony was a major aspect of the claims by Republicans that President Biden himself had benefited from his son's business operations.
Which was a frame job, which was Bill Barr set up this side channel so that he could funnel stuff from known Russian spies into an investigation into Hunter Biden and possibly predicate an investigation into Joe Biden. So this is all fantasy, but it's all stuff that Donald Trump has said. Sam Alito got into it. Sam Alito at one point It was insane. Samuel Alito goes through all of the inconveniences that a president or a former president being under investigation would go through. And again, the implication is that Jack Smith is off on a tear trying to frame Donald Trump. And then Samuel Alito, and this is one of the most remarkable things, Samuel Alito basically says,
and then there has to be a trial, and that may involve great expense, and it may take up a lot of time. And during the trial, the former president may be unable to engage in other activities that the former president would want to engage in.
And this is Samuel Alito sitting in the Supreme Court, refusing to look at the facts before him, vomiting up what he's been reading on Truth Social, which is Donald Trump's false claim that the only reason he's being prosecuted is to keep him off the campaign trail. They've all internalized these things that Donald Trump has the script that Donald Trump has given them.
I'm supposed to be in Georgia, I'm supposed to be in New Hampshire, I'm supposed to be in Ohio and lots of other places. And they have me sitting here for a Biden trial. It's a Biden trial.
And this is the basis they're going to use to rewrite the Constitution and carve out protections for his crimes and only his crimes. This is where we end up. What I want to talk about, what we're going to talk about over the weeks ahead, is what brought us to this place. What brought us to the place where at least 3 and possibly 5 Supreme Court justices believe outright bullshit. And because they believe that, they're going to rewrite the Constitution to basically permit a king, to basically permit Donald Trump to enjoy impunity, to basically pave the way for an unaccountable authoritarian to come in if Donald Trump is elected in 2024.
Thanks for listening to Ball of Threads. You can expect a new episode about every 2 weeks until the election. To support this series and get answers to your questions with a bonus Q&A podcast, go to patreon.com/ballofthreads. You can join us for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your sharing this work with anyone who cares about the Constitution, and please consider giving us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts.